Welcome to my fourth part of the French cinema season. We're into the 60s now, and we've left behind what was the previous episode of Edward et Caroline. And we go to Jacques Demy's 1963 film, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. It has some ties to Edward and Caroline right the way through, even from Caroline herself being in Umbrellas of Cherbourg and Vernon. And we also have Marc Michel, who plays the character of Roland Cassard in here, who starred in Le Trou, which means the whole, but it's a Jacques Becker film, who was the director of Edward and Caroline. So we have some bleed over from the previous film to this, showing that French cinema was a small world still at this time. Jacques Demy made this film for a number of reasons, but it has an autobiographical nature that runs alongside his life. One of the main characters, the central character of Guy in the film, works in a garage at the start of the film. He runs as a mechanic, or he works as a mechanic in the garage. And his father wanted Jacques Demy to take over the running of the family garage when he was younger. That's what his plan was for Jacques Demy as grown up. But his mother was the fan of musical theatre and used to take Jacques to the theatre, especially musical theatre, for him to enjoy. And this film feels a bit like a homage to both of his parents. As Demy talked about the fact that he felt like musical theatre as a structure was very segmented and broken up. It was very much a bit of story with a bit of song, then a dance, then a bit of story, then a song, and everything was very broken up that way. And he wanted to create on film something that was much more seamless, something that flowed together, and therefore set about trying to create the Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Now, the Umbrellas of Cherbourg, for those that don't know, and I'm not going to go into any spoilers here, so I'm encouraging you to watch it, is a piece of film that is a musical, but there are no words that are spoken. Every word is sung in service of the story. It has a look that most people will think is reminiscent of La La Land, made by Damien Chazelle, but Damien Chazelle is very open in admitting that La La Land was his homage to Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which was his favourite film, or is his favourite film. And so the use of colour especially is no accident. La La Land isn't a remake of Umbrellas of Cherbourg. They have quite different plots, but their style and similarity to each other is unmistakable. And it's no spoiler to say that I'm a very big fan of La La Land and musical theatre in general. So before even going in to watch this, I had a feeling that this was something that was going to tick a lot of boxes for me. But he couldn't do this by himself. Because it was a musical, he needed somebody who had a bit more expertise in music than he did, and he enrolled the help of Michel Legrand. Michel Legrand I've talked about before on the channel when he did the music for America Seen by a Frenchman, if I've got that right, which was a documentary where Francois Reichenbach went to America and went coast to coast and filmed some of the weird and wonderful things that happened along the way. I'll stick a link to that in the description if you want to hear me talk about that in one of my watch list videos. But they sat down, sold them on the project and said, right, let's write the script and write the music that goes alongside it. And they sat for weeks and months staring at blank pages every day until inspiration finally hit them. It started off with one theme. And what they did was they wrote themes for each character that kind of represented their feelings and their emotions as they went along. So the two central characters of Guy and Geneviève, sorry, nearly said Genevieve, but Geneviève was her name. And then Roland Cassard was another character, and the mother. There aren't very many characters that have prominent screen time in this, but each has their own little theme or their own little vibe throughout the film. Now, one of the difficulties that they had, well, they had a number of difficulties, but one of the difficulties they had was in financing it and how to make this work practically, because people were not prepared to take a chance on this medium. West Side Story had been released in '61 in America, and this was getting thought about at the same time, and I'm sure, even though it wasn't discussed in any of the extras, that the success of West Side Story led, or did not hurt Demy in trying to make this film. Even though there was no real track record for this, his films weren't of a similar ilk beforehand. They wanted at the very least for this to be shot in monochrome or black and white. And that was not something that he wanted to do, because the use of colour through this is no accident at all. Everything is very carefully paired together. The background walls with the costumes, with the foliage, everything fits together and is very much themed so that it fits together and makes this more cohesive whole that Demy set out to make. But one of the really amazing things that is in this is that they had to create the score, or write the score and record the score, before they ever filmed a scene with any of the actors. Which breaks the fourth wall a little bit, because none of the voices singing are actually the voices of the cast. It's like Michel Legrand's sister sings Anne Vernon's part. So when they got the score together and they had to think about how long, when they were writing the script, how long it would take one character to get from that side of the screen to that side of the screen, if they were doing it in walking or transition, they had to think about how much time to give those things. It's incredible that it works as well as it does, especially when you consider that then the actors that are in there, like Catherine Deneuve, who acts the character of Genevieve, she had to act and sing, or act and mime, in a believable way. As this was really, she was a burgeoning star at the time, and this really broke big time for her, made her the big thing that she was, including changing what was her classic look at the time. That was very much her calling card. Demy worked with her, as it turns out, let Agnes Varda do some of the coercing on the side to say, I think this would be a good idea, rather than the male person or the male director saying it directly, which is a really nice contrast to the person that she'd worked with before, like Roger Vadim, who seems to be the director that kind of had this thing for really attractive and manipulating and using the sexuality of many attractive women in his films. A very different way of directing, beautiful women on screen. So both La La Land, Umbrellas of Cherbourg and West Side Story all have this idea of romance across some sort of divide. There's like a money divide in La La Land, as they're both struggling. They're both kind of trying to be on the up and meeting as they're trying to push their way up. In West Side Story, it's a racial divide, and in Umbrellas of Cherbourg, it's a class divide. It mightn't seem like it by today's standards, but certainly Guy, working in a mechanics, was seen as a much lower level than Genevieve, whose mother owned a shop, was a shopkeeper. It was definitely seen as a bit of a class divide there, and there's a disapproving side of Genevieve's mother to her relationship with Guy, aside from the fact that she's very young. And we have this character of Rowan Cassard who comes in, who is seems to be a jewellery dealer and seems to be of wealth and privilege, and is a much more suitable pairing for her daughter. And you get this sort of love triangle that becomes the core of the film. And this love triangle is really split up by the fact that Guy gets enlisted for national service. He'll get taken away to fight in the Algerian War. But the only bit that we get alluded to from the Algerian War is the letters that he sends back to Genevieve about what's happening there, about the struggles and how afraid he is at the time. And all of this is an allegory to Demy himself, who was supposed to, should have been fighting in the Algerian War himself, but managed to, with the help of friends and family, convinced that he wasn't fit for duty, and basically absconded out of it and got released from national service. And the timing of this film being released fits very well, because the timing, the war was from 54 to 62, and certainly there's a timeline across the movie that goes across many years, but given this was released in 63, it seemed to fit very clearly with the arc of the end of the Algerian Civil War that was there. And that theme runs in the background, and it must have been very raw at the time when this came out. And it also plays in this idea that somebody went to war, maybe some of the fears that Demy had, that if he was to go to war, everything would change for him come back home. And that's pretty much a core central theme of the film, in that things do change when people are away, especially in those formative years of people's lives. how it can play out and have an effect on the rest of your life when there's absence that happens. So suffice to say that Umbrellas of Cherbourg, I think, is an absolute star of a film. It gained worldwide acclaim, which it absolutely should, especially maybe unsurprising given that the musicals were such a hot thing in America around that stage, culminating in the success of West Side Story. But in general, Demy wanted his films at their core to be about some key tacits. He said that he wanted his films to make an audience laugh, cry, dance, sing, and love. Check out The Umbrellas of Cherbourg over the next while. And that brings me to the end of this film, or this episode of my French cinema season. If you've watched Umbrellas of Cherbourg and you want to celebrate how wonderful it is down in the comments, please do. If you didn't like it, please let me know what you didn't like. I know musical theatre isn't something that gels with everybody, but I'd like to know if this one broke the barrier for that with you or not. And we're left with the 70s. The 70s are a bit of a trickier decade to talk about, because I could have went many different directions, and my first inclination was to pick a Jean-Pierre Melville film. But again, in trying to theme something to go along with The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, but I'm trying to keep with this theme of what seems to be females running through a lot of the films that I've talked about so far, and to link The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which is, while made by a man, really made the start of Catherine Deneuve. I'm going to go for the Chantal Akerman film, and rather behemoth film of Jean Dillman. 23 Commerce Quay, 1080 Brussels. It's 3 hours 45. I may be an absolute fool for trying to do it, but this is the whole point of the French cinema season, is to delve in to films like this. And the last film I watched this length was Brighter Summer Day, and well, it's one of the most magnificent films of all time, so no pressure. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you soon on the French cinema season. Take care.